This is a win in putting a limit on these nationwide injunctions.
What I've seen does look like a victory for the Trump administration.
It is just the idea of this power of the executive branch that really is at issue here.
This is the ball game for President Trump's agenda, because we know more than any modern president, he loves to govern through executive action.
The big news coming in there. Now, President Trump has faced many court losses and setbacks among judges, district court judges, appeals court judges around the country. It's led to the freezes and the national injunctions against Trump policies where judges found them likely illegal. And headlines like the one you see on your screen and that have really been a regular part of this Trump era. Indeed, it's common across Trump's first 160 days or so that he has bluntly tested how far he can go. And thus, as you see from the voluminous number of red X's there, he's gotten more smackdowns than other presidents in both parties. That is what we've been living through in the courts. And now, in response to those very court losses, Republicans on the high court just gave Trump this unusual win, limiting lower court judges on how and when they can pause a presidential policy, even when judges, or ultimately the Supreme Court, find that policy is illegal. Typically, lower courts say that it's likely illegal, and they have a measurement for that, and ultimately, if it goes all the way up there, the Supreme Court rules on it. And so things that are likely illegal are paused in the meantime. That makes sense, because you don't want people to get away with the court's slow process to do the illegal thing for a year or two before they finally catch up with it at the high court. So that's just describing this in plain English. But this new decision, which came down from the Supreme Court Friday, changes the standard rules which govern the president, which governed Trump, which governed Biden before him. And that's why, before I get into any other details, I'll just tell you up top, it's another sign of how this MAGA-friendly court, with Republican and Trump-appointed justices, will blatantly change rules and even make up new rules for Trump's benefit. And then consider this. I'm not going to read a ton of quotes from this ruling, just a few, but even the Republican justices who just changed the rules for Trump acknowledge how a president like Trump can be caught pushing unlawful policies. So it's Trump appointee Amy Coney Barrett who wrote this new ruling Friday, noting in the ruling that when a court concludes the president has acted unlawfully, the answer is still not for the court to exceed its power to. Barrett using the decision to make up new rules for what exceeds power means. Before Friday, I'll just tell it to you straight, judges routinely issued these national freezes on presidential policies when they found the policy was likely to be deemed illegal. Barrett herself and her colleagues routinely oversaw that approach. They're a part of the thing that they now say suddenly exceeds power because of their new rules for Trump. Now they claim that this new made-up rule is the better way to go. And so their past approach, by their own definition, exceeded the power allowed under the new rule they made up. Now, if Barrett or Justice Roberts cared about logic or being consistent and having a legal reputation that was credible, they'd be able to see that that looks really illogical and inconsistent, what non-lawyers would call being a total hypocrite. And critics say these masks of nonpartisanship, the things we hear about the independent court, have clearly fallen. Critics say this MAGA court will, as we saw Friday, risk professional embarrassment, looking bad, hypocritical, if it just helps Trump get any extra leeway to do what he wants. And those critiques have come from legal experts, from constitutional scholars, from elected Democrats, and the dissenters in this decision. Take Justices Jackson and Sotomayor, who dissented to this Friday ruling while noting the majority's approach is an attack on our system of law itself, an existential threat to the rule of law. Those are the strongest types of objections you get from lawyers. And I know we live in an era of hot takes and the internet and TikTok and everybody saying everything, but those are lawyers turned judges, of course, when they put on the robes, speaking as sweepingly as lawyers ever do. because they talk in a certain way and judges talk in a certain way. So when they say this is bigger than this case, we're talking about the whole rule of law itself in this country at this time, dealing with this president who's putting Marines in the streets and clashing over the National Guard. Well, you could believe their warnings or not. Now, when this news came down Friday, there were plenty of legal experts and journalists who noted that the MAGA majority's new help for Trump is sweeping. This isn't bound to the topic of this case, immigration debates. And that's a topic in this case in the definition of citizenship where Trump has already lost several rounds in the lower courts. This would affect everything, will affect everything, as long as we have this limit on what courts can do. Now, in those lower courts, Trump's lawyers have been trying to toss, ignore, and rewrite the original words of the Constitution. And they've been trying to throw that out and insert Trump's claim that people born here, he says, should no longer be counted as citizens, even though they always were. That approach has no precedent. You can't point to a prior case that supports it. It obviously runs against the word's original meaning in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. I mention that because this new Friday decision rewrites the current standard, but then oddly claims that it's drawing on the original meanings and words that were applied back in the day, and it says are not being applied now with the injunctions. And if you don't want to get into all the weeds, that's fine. I'll just show you a high point example. Justice Barrett claims that she took an originalist approach in the new case, that she's only concerned about history, even as they ignore the obvious originalist history of what it means. If you're born here, you're a citizen here. So in the Friday ruling, Justice Barrett says if you go back far enough, when the country was smaller, when life was different, there were not national injunctions available at the founding period. So Republicans say, yeah, that used to be different. The dissenters, by contrast, said the fairest thing is to just leave the rules as they are, meaning don't change them for Trump, which is why you see those three justices who voted against what Trump wanted Friday. The same MAGA judges who have been perfectly okay with the same sweeping national injunctions over the 4 years that Biden faced them now say this is a terrible problem. There are some court cases that are complicated. There are some where the fair result based on the evidence we have might cut against what you'd want in your politics, and it's the job of honest legal experts, honest journalists to explain why that works that way. This ain't one of those times. These same judges just last year were fine with these national injunctions when they were used to slow down Biden, to trim Biden policies on COVID, to go against his more liberal or progressive approaches to try to deal with the student loan debt crisis. And back then, these same judges stopped the student loan plan entirely for Biden, but they left in place those national injunctions. Indeed, back then, that ruling against Biden was to curb presidential power that he used. Times report, we checked, noted it that way back then. And so if you don't remember anything else about this, don't worry about the 14th Amendment, the talk of originalism. Just keep in mind the obvious fact, which is embarrassing for the MAGA justices. That's what they're acting like, so that's what they sometimes will be called in cases when they rule as MAGA justices. What was fine to legally slow down Biden last year is now suddenly unacceptable for slowing down Trump, and they want you to believe it's because they went back in the history books and read a bunch of stuff from 200 years ago. It looks like a partisan double standard because it is. And that's before you get to the legal fact that this President Trump has lost more lower court rounds at this point in his term than Biden did at his. In other words, the yellow light for Biden was fine with them nationally, and the yellow light for Trump is not, even though Biden was driving slower. Now, more broadly, there is data that shows judges have been using these national injunctions more often. And you could deal with that trend in any number of ways. But the MAGA majority only deemed this a problem when it bothered Trump. And Justice Barrett, who has at times sided with Justice Roberts on fundamental baseline protections of aspects of the rule of law, is clearly not concerned about how this all looks now, with a recent turn that is viewed by some experts as the kind of extraordinary turnaround that shows she's solidly to the right, and not just on legal philosophy, but on what are the mounting Trump-era litmus tests for our world right now and our country's democracy. Because if you're going to say what Trump is doing is okay, the status quo won't work. You have to change the rules. You have to allow more likely illegal behavior with no national slowing down, no yellow light. You have to do that even at the cost of accountability, of the role of judges' power, which is something judges tend to protect more often, and perhaps even for accountable democracy itself. So where are we now? Well, as always, dealing directly with the facts is the most important thing first, especially at a time where your government is hiding the facts and the judges, for various reasons, including their own sort of legalized judicial propaganda about how they landed this decision, pay no attention to the guy in the Oval Office who appointed me. This is strictly because I've been in the library with the history books. Well, we can start with the facts, and then we turn to what's going to happen with the law if there will be still rule of law in this great nation.